from you, and welcome.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone. It's always a pleasure, and I enjoy very much to come out and share my research, and hopefully it will make a difference. I used to teach at the University of Southern California, and I taught in a management program, so it was always nice to have the decision makers in my classroom to provide this data, so as we move forward. But thanks to Jim, he did a really nice job to help kind of introduce the Institute. I would just like to put out to you, we do non-proprietary research, so everything that you saw regarding the Silver Snook and Silverella tables and my research as well as my other colleagues is there on site. And we do a lot of different kind of research, as you can see with our 4 centers here. So as I move forward, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to give you kind of 2 different kind of studies here. But we're going to look at the office environment in kind of a holistic perspective here. And I'm going to provide you with a field study, intervention study, a longitudinal study, as well as one extended lab study that we did. Look at those impacts of those interventions, how did we design this, and thanks to Dr. Jack Helen, who helped me a lot in the respect with his research to design some of these interventions. So we all kind of have our link together as we work. And I'm sure many of you that are in the field, when we're looking at working environments, this is sort of kind of the negative. We have this issue and this problem, and how do we address it? We'll be moving into interventions. But we do know that there is an association between MSDs and visual discomfort when we're looking at office work. And there's a variety of things. We have psychosocial issues, job control, high work pace, low supervisory support, as well as we get into the input device. Jack has Dennerline has done a lot of work into this. And then when we pull those together, we're looking at the static low level of work as someone is sitting there for a long period of time. And this is always the way when I call them knowledge workers. So it goes from accountants to radiologists to call centers, customer service reps. So a common theme that I keep hearing in all of our presentations is there's multiple contributing factors here, so those are important. So I'm going to talk about how we brought those into the design of the studies. The purpose of both of these research studies is a combination. It's not only just looking at the workspace design, but it's also providing the training to how to use the workspace, as well as providing tools that the individual will know why they're doing this. And these are the outcome variables that we're looking at. We went from a very individual, looking at MSDs, to computing behaviors, which is how people set up their work environment. And then we looked at workspace satisfaction and comfort. We looked at group performance, group cohesiveness, and kind of a term that I was kind of pulling together is ergonomic climate. How does the organization impart some of those ergonomic needs, and how do the employees perceive management really addressing those ergonomic needs? And then back to the real bottom line is how does all of this impact on performance? So with this intervention study, we were able to do some longitudinal measures of performance and able to track those with the different groups that we were working with. And another thing is just the longitudinal nature that we were able to see this over time, looking at that impact on computer work and on the individual itself. There's a key construct here, and it's pulling off of the job control and job demand Karasic's model, but we're extending a little more. And I just looked at this a little bit, and I've kind of pulled this construct out to bring into this training and flexible workspace, which is kind of called environmental control, is how I've defined it. And what it is that you have the availability of the workspaces. You have adjustability, you have flexibility, movable furnitures. All of those is what I'm kind of calling flexible workspaces. Then you have the culture, which is what we call kind of management encouraging people to use their work tools. For office workers, we're looking at computers, we're looking at tables, chairs, and lighting and monitors. Those are their tools. So we want them to exert control over those and be able to feel that they have that control over it and have the permission and the culture to do that. And you may wonder why this is important. In my experience over the years, I've worked a lot with facility managers and also with a lot of office system furnitures. And facility managers have a mental model of how the office should be set up. And they really don't like it when people, as the individual worker, change it. because that's not the design they had in their mind. So there's a paradigm shift that needs to occur, and that culture needs to be there. And the training allows them to move forward on this. So the conceptual model put forward, hopefully not too many arrows as we've been laughing about before, but on the left-hand side here, you have the office ergonomics training and the workspace change. Those are going to influence the ergonomic knowledge of the individual, and then your computing postures and behaviors in the middle. Also in concert, you have workspace satisfaction and the measuring of job control, and the outcome variables on the far right, discomfort, performance, collaboration, and culture. So let's dive right in and look at our field intervention study of training in the workspace design. This was a company that was full of accountants. It was a consulting company, a very large company. And so there was a couple things that were very appealing to us. We were able to get into some of the performance measures, and that's why we were able to look at those over the time period. We had a control group that was going to be staying in the existing environment. We had two other groups we were able to break out. One was moving into a new workspace, and then the third group was moving into a new workspace, but we provided training, and not only how to use the workspace again, but why they were doing it. And when I say training, I start at the very top level to make sure that that's the organizational readiness, that that company is ready to embark on this, that they are going to be responsive to the ergonomic needs. So I start at the top, then I moved down to the supervisory level, and that's another type of training, is to make sure the supervisor knows what is the culture of this organization, where are they supposed to go to get the ergonomic issues, how do they take care of it, so they understand when the employee comes to them what their reactions and responses are, and they also know that senior management is responding. So I call it a three-tier training. It's very important. And so the last group is I had senior partners actually in the training who actively were participating with the trainees themselves. So over time, you can see it was about a year-long study, which is pretty unique to be able to do in the United States. The goal of the workplace training, these were, going back to Patrick's discussion this morning, is what was the goals? What were the expectations that this organization had? They wanted to increase the ergonomics. They wanted their workers to be healthy. They wanted a high retention rate. They wanted a low turnover. Those were all of their corporate strategic goals that they were looking at. They wanted to enhance the culture. They wanted people to feel that they belong to the organization. And the pictures over to the right are the ones, these are the new workspaces, very open, but yet a variety of different workspaces. So it wasn't just an individual workstation, as well as it was small teaming. Group collaboration was very important. They worked in cross-functional teams, so this was another goal, is how the design was going to support it. What were some of our methods? As I described already, I did an organizational assessment. I understand, work with facilities, the human resources, senior management commitment, and we set everything up before we even designed the intervention itself. We did web-based questionnaires over the 3 periods of time, which was measuring those outcome variables that I described earlier. The observation, we went out in the field and we did observations before and after using these tools. The one new tool is the Office Ergonomic Assessment, which I developed with another colleague, Dr. Van Ammon, who works at IWH, which is a tool that actually assesses how people set up their work environment. So we not only wanted the body postures, but we also wanted to see, did they actually change their workspace? And the last was the business process analysis, which was a way for us to go in and to see how they actually accomplished their job, how long did it take, and so that's what we used. The instructional design was, again, a very systematic approach, and the training objectives are put here, and again, I want you to point out, it's not only the knowledge of recognizing it and how to use your chair and how to move your monitor, but it's also bringing in what I call those healthy computing behaviors. Getting up, changing your behavior, your next posture is your best posture, and getting those kind of characteristics out. And lastly, you see, is where they need to go to obtain their ergonomic company programs. Again, this is the importance of bringing that supervisor in so that that individual is going to be prepared. So what did we find? Well, pleasingly, we were able to see that the control group pretty much over time on the far left here remained about the same, and no statistical significance difference there, but where we started to pick up the difference was with the two intervention groups. What is interesting is the workspace only, we were able to see some significant reduction in it, but over time, we really started to pick up more of that longitudinal effect when you bring training coupled with the workspace design itself. So again, you get a little bit with the workspace, but when you start coupling it with the training, that's when you really start kind of separating out and see that significant change. What did we see on one of the psychosocial variables? We pretty much remained pretty flat for the workspace only. It actually got worse over time with the control group, but what we started to see is that slight increase over time, that this is again perceptions, that the individual felt that they had control, and when we say job control again, this is the environmental control. I had control, I could exert control over my workspace. And then when we look at office ergonomics climate, again with the yellow line, we see that that just increased over time, meaning that they felt that they were aware, they understood the principles, and they also felt that their needs were being attended to. So I'm just kind of sectioning out, looking at discomfort and looking at the psychosocial variables. And what was the bottom line for productivity? It was a real split here. So you can see where the control pretty much nothing happened. Experimental workspace only, there was a slight increase, but where we really got, and literally again, these are consultants, billable hours, for them to be able to have an improvement close to 11%, meaning they were getting the reports out much quicker. They were reducing it down by almost 2 days. So I couldn't do return on investment, but they had those internal numbers, and so that made a very powerful statement there. So taking a step back, what did we see with these findings in this particular study? We saw an increase in the office ergonomics. I did pre-post measures as well as I did follow-up to see if it was sustainable over time, and it was. There was an increase in job control for the train in the workspace group, and then we saw that significant decrease in the MSDs in the train group. The BPA, the cycle time, we had a significant improvement in that time for the train and workspace group. And that model that I put up there, we appear to have some support in that one. Now, I had that in my field, so now I wanted to bring it into my lab study. And so we set it up. And as my influence, my co-PI was Vince Celerello, and you can see the design of it was very strong in how we looked at it. The research questions here, because this was a sit-stand workstation, it was a full contiguous work surface, and it was all hydraulically driven. So that's the flexibility of the workspace. But the questions, again, were very similar to what we're looking in the field study. Musculoskeletal visual discomfort will be minimal. Now with this one, as opposed to going out into the field where I'm seeing reductions, I was actually working with, and starting at the beginning, with 22 healthy female participants. So then we're measuring and watching them over time. So it's a little different population than what you're doing in the looking at the field study. Performance will be higher for the trained group, and then there was an increased knowledge that I would say for those that are in the trained group and how they set up their space. And then also we would see more alterations between sit and stand, because again, that was part of the training as we talked about the healthy benefits of varying your work posture and then teaching them on how to do that, and this is what we were hypothesizing. This is a longitudinal study for a lab. It's a 15-day study, and it's 8 hours a day. We were able to do that, very similar. My lab is right downstairs from the repetitive motion lab. And two groups, the minimally trained group and the ergonomically trained group. And as you see on this first 4 days here, I went out into the field and I mimicked a customer call service, sat there and went through and did a thorough job analysis, brought it back to the lab. We set up the same training they got in the real world, They had to meet a precondition of a certain performance measure. So when we were ready to go, everybody was on the same page. They had to hit some competencies. There was no MSDs reporting over those 4 days, and then we start splitting it out. Let me walk you through this. There's what we call 5 blocks. Another variable I did is I manipulated the cognitive complexity of the task itself, or the cognitive demands. There were 3 of those. Those were determined by the task analysis. Again, I'm trying to mimic that, so you have that varying workload level. So those were randomized in each one of those blocks. And then you will see free choice for the first 6 days. This is where the experimentally trained group had the opportunity to do whatever they want. Sit, stand, they could control whatever they want, as well as the minimally trained group could do anything. They were aware it was a sit-stand workstation. They were oriented to that. They were shown the features. They were given a pamphlet. And so I would say it was a typical minimally trained of what you would get sometimes in industry. Then as you move into it, there were some periods where, and it's going back to Jack, how long do we need to have folks standing? And we didn't really know that. We'd seen in the literature anywhere between 5 and 20 minutes, so we decided we'd give them 3 days where they stood 5 minutes and each 50-minute block. So over the 8 hours, there were 50-minute blocks. They stood 5 minutes right in the middle of that 50-minute block. And then the next 3 days, we had 20 minutes. So they stood for 20 minutes. Again, that's why we call it mandatory. And then they had to raise it into a standing position and then lower it at the end of 20 minutes. Then what's really important when I started showing you the results is what happens after that mandatory practice period. And that's the free choice at the very end. Those are the 3 days there. So what did we see? Well, I already mentioned that we had 22 healthy females. They were all admin assistant. There's a range of population because we recruit from the local community. So our average age goes, we move it around, it was about 45 because we had folks in the late 20s up to 61 years old. And then the experimental task, I already mentioned, we had 3 cognitive levels, and it was based on a customer service job, so I was able to get into the performance measures of what we expected them to do. Every day they had an 80% proficiency measure of quality that they were supposed to meet. That was a goal, and that's what was in the standard, industry standard. They received feedback on how well they did every morning the next day. In the real world, they get that about once a week or once a month. Again, we were kind of condensing it down. And I remind you that we looked at quality control and the proficiency, as well as the number of faxes. And it's 7 hours a day for 15 days a week. 15 days. The training group over in the right, this shows you the picture of what our sit-stand workstation was, data collection effort here. I've kind of walked through already what the workshop was. Very similar to what I did in the field, except I brought in more of the sit-stand components. So we talked about that a little more. I had them in pairs. So I had 2 workstations in the lab, and they came and worked in the same. So if they were in the randomly assigned, if they were in the trained group, those 2 individuals were trained together. Then they went off and they worked for a month, and then the next group, if they were in the control group, they worked together. So there was no cross-contamination between the 2 groups. It was an hour-and-a-half workshop, very similar to what we did in the field, hands-on. A couple things that I didn't mention that we did in the field is that we also provided ergonomic reminders throughout that year period to those that received the training. So every month they got an ergonomic reminder, which was based on what their scores were on their ergonomic knowledge test. So if they missed a couple questions, I would use that as part of the feedback. So we made it very intrinsic to the particular working group. And the phase 2 is just bringing in that practice period. And those are the 6 days that we did our sit-stand practice periods. We had them. We had ergonomic reminders. And the minimally trained group, I've already talked about, they received what I would call the brief standard orientation. Again, having worked in the real world, this was pretty typical. We actually probably gave them more than what they would typically receive. Usually, if you walk into a building, we've got new chairs, everybody sees the pamphlets hanging off the bottom of their chairs. They're never removed, people are not looking at those. So there's minimal knowledge that is being transferred there. Data collection, every hour we collected MSDs and visual discomfort. So we looked at those and they filled them out. It was based on the Nordic scale, but we actually bridged it out for the left, right, front, and back. We had 67 body parts that we looked at, and then we narrowed it down as we analyzed the data. Talked about performance data, quantity, and the number of faxes that were completed. Again, they have performance measures they needed to meet. They were told that every day, and it would vary. We would vary that according to whatever their workload was to make it more real world. Again, we got that kind of schedule off of the company that we were basing this off of. And then we administered a baseline, which I showed at the first 4 days, and then every hourly. So what did we find? It took me 4 years to collect this data, so we need to appreciate this. Pause. I was waiting for this, but again, it was very important that we wanted to bring that into the lab. I wanted to mimic it and see, are we seeing the same results that we have in the field itself? Let me walk you through this. You have the minimally trained group, which is in our nice red, and in the green is the ergonomically trained group. This is the MSDs. This is across the days. So you take all those 7 measurements for these 7 hours, and we combine them, and here we're actually seeing the number of reported MSDs. And when I mean the top 7, out of those 67 body parts, we found there were 7 that we were seeing some changes in. And they were all in the upper extremity as well in the lower back. And so those were our consistent, what we call our top 7 body parts. Very consistent to what we had seen in the literature. So as you look across the time, you can just see the minimally trained group is just reporting discomfort all the way through, whereas it actually is getting non-existent for the trained group itself. Now, that's across the 15 days. What did we see across the day? And this is, again, the 7 sessions across. 0 at the beginning, and then you move on. And you can definitely see as the day goes on, not surprising, that we actually start seeing that curve that's going up. Again, the minimally trained group exhibiting more problems. What did we see with visual discomfort? Interesting. Now, visual discomfort was, when I talk about that in the instructional objectives, it was very important for us, and I know when we're dealing with visual, that we're looking at folks with eyeglasses and different progressive lenses. And this is something that's been raised a lot in the literature regarding. Does the visual discomfort lead the MSDs? If you can't see in your screen, do you start going physically forward to look at it? Are you hunching more over it? Because we have a tendency not to bring the monitor to us. We're very adaptable, and so we go forward. So the 2 that we really saw the difference, which was interesting, was the difficulty of focusing and the eyes blurry. The control group never moved it. I actually have an instrumented keyboard, I have an instrumented mouse, which I'm analyzing the data now, and I will say that there were other outcome variables where we got EMGs that we're looking at, and then we did the mental perception, we did the NASA TLX. So we'll also be getting those pictures of subjective perceptions of the workload, as well as the physical outcome, as well as performance. So this is where I say it's the systems. And it was interesting that those that were in the train group knew what to do. And we also saw that same result when we were out in the field with the lab, for the field study. Performance results. I was very pleased to see this. 2 things. There was no significant difference between the amount of faxes that were being entered. So what we can say is the workload was the same. It wasn't one group, the control group didn't enter 1,000 more faxes than the other. So there was no difference there. And where we saw the split is when we get into the accuracy. And we saw a significant difference between the trained group and the non-trained group. And this is very important because this particular job, if you made a human error filling out and they were completing first report of injuries, if you made an error in the accuracy or you entered in the wrong employer's number, that was a downstream cost that was very, very high because the group that was dealing with those forms would have to call back to the employers and the time that was added on to that. So when I reported back to our industry on this one, they were ecstatic with this result because they would rather them enter 2 less faxes but keep at that 80% accuracy rate. So what do we see with the sit-stand? Very interesting, Dr. Callahan's looking at. Well, we found, first of all, the minimally trained group did not stand at all. Nobody stood. Nobody. And when I debriefed them, they said, yeah, we knew, but they didn't care. They didn't have the training. They didn't understand it. Even though they were hurting, they never explored their workspace. They never changed it up again. Nothing. Flat. I couldn't believe it. Watching this over many years, somebody has got to have been trying it out. They didn't. Maybe they loved their chair so much they sat in it. I don't know. But obviously we're seeing changes. What this is showing is looking at their time. Again, remember at the beginning, those first 6 days, that the experimentally trained group could do whatever they wanted. They could sit, stand, whatever. But it wasn't until they went into those mandatory practice periods and actually tried it out, and then we saw a significant change. So if you take the first 6 days versus days 13, 14, and 15, you start seeing that they actually stood almost twice as long. So they were only standing around 20 minutes or so, but now you're seeing they're creeping up to that magical hour. This is very consistent in the literature. When I was looking at everybody who's looked at sit-stand workstations and the impact that they have and what do people, how long do they stand, it seems to be a very natural period over the day to stand about an hour. And there's about 3 studies now that we've shown that consistently. So how often did they change their posture? Well, after they went through that mandatory sit-stand period, they actually started to stand almost twice as much. So we went from 1 time all the way up to about 3 or 4, sometimes 6 times. It's pretty substantial when you look at that. Again, as we go into the summaries, why is this important? For the minimally trained group in comparison to the experimental group, you really saw there was a greater reporting of MSDs for the minimally group. The trained one, you started to see that those symptoms were very minimal for the trained group over 15 days. Remember, 15 days, 8 hours a day. So the exposure was very high to those workload in that task. Workload was equal, and when I say that, that means the number of faxes that were entered each day. But where we really pick up the performance change was in the accuracy. So this was very important for, again, significantly higher for the trained group. There were changes in the positive direction for the behavior for the trained group. They stood more often and longer in comparison to they were at the beginning before that practice period. And so what we're saying, it's plausible because of this sit-stand mandatory time of practice, they had a greater sense of control. Remember, we gave them a permission, we encouraged them in the training. My 2 RAs, along with myself, we were kind of the managers in the lab, if you want to say. So whenever there was kind of an ergonomic issue or need that came up, we trained them, we would call them ergo buddies, so we would always encourage them to help each other out first, and then they could come to us. And it was interesting to listen to the dialogue anecdotally of how they did help each other out quite a bit. So as we take that step back, what do we see? Well, consistency between what we found in the field as well as what we found in the lab, that sense of control over the work environment, the ability to change that is very important. And in the field, I can't harp on enough the importance of that long-term management commitment up front. So the organizational readiness to embark on this was very high. And I can say there's 2 other studies that Ben Amick and I have done. We've seen very consistent results with when we introduce in our intervention and share only with training. So we're getting consistent messages along here how important this is. Flexible work environment provides some. That's good. But we need to really push that out to get that healthy benefit. We need to have it coupled with the training and have that organizational commitment. One thing I really highlight now is this interaction between the visual symptoms and the MSD symptoms, because there's a lot of theories that are going on. Is it the vision that's driving that MSD? Or are you, because your vision, you're not having corrected lenses, you're not moving the monitor, which I found with the minimally trained group, they didn't move anything. So that interaction is going to be very important as we see over time. And leveraging that concept of environmental control. Again, having the supervisors be aware, the managers be aware, and giving them the permission to change it. In the field study, there was a lot of different spaces that they could also move to, and we actually measured that, and we saw people get up and move around more after they received the training because they were encouraged to use the whole facility. And everything was Wi-Fi back then, so they were able to move everything around. So as employees gain that sense of control over the environment, throughout all the levels of the company, we can show that positive impact on health and safety, and I think we've demonstrated this, and I think we're starting to suggest through our research that this is very important to look at. That combination of the management commitment, the systems perspective, the user control over the job themselves and exert it, and that's the impact that we're going to have on our health and safety. Thank you very much.
Just a real simple question, Michelle. Can you clarify what you mean by reports of incidences? We had a lot of reports there, but there were only 22 people, is that right?
Right, yeah, thanks, Jack. It was any report over, we had the scale range from 0 to 10. It was any report over a 0.5 on the scale.
At any point in the day?
At any point.
One person could have
Yeah.
multiple reports?
Correct,
Okay.
yes. So it was the sum of. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I had a question about your field study. I got the idea that your training was not as that effective as in the lab study. Is that correct?
There was, when you went over the time, the workstation only group, I'm going to go back there, Ricky, but workstation only group kind of remained flat, and then the third time period, there was no statistical significant difference between looking at the workspace only in comparison to the control group. It started splitting out at the 12-month period that the workstation and trained group actually was exhibiting, I'm sorry, the reverse. They were actually reducing in their MSDs. So there was some, but we didn't see that pattern continue over time.
Yeah, so in the beginning there was a difference, but not between the work environment and the work environment and the training group. After, at the end of this, I'm not sure, 6 months or something,
Yeah,
you don't see any difference. So they know how, but they don't do it.
Yeah.
So what do you make that this lab study, because this is a really short period of time, it's quite intensive, also the frequency of training and reminders and whatever. Do you think that this will sustain, or is this just a temporary effect?
Oh, I definitely think it's not a temporary effect just because they were working full time and it was a real job. But again, I would say in the field study where we really saw the break was when we took that 12-month measurement. If we had only stopped at 3 months, it would probably look about the same between the workspace and the trained workspace and trained group. But as time went on, that's when we started to see the split. But remember, with the lab study, we had healthy individuals, and then we started to see that sustainability of those reported MSDs over that long period of time. So I don't think we can call it a placebo or a Hawthorne effect just due to the fact that it's full time for a long period of time.
Michelle?
Thank you, sir.
Excellent study. I just have one question. You have these groups. You had a control group, you had a work environment group, and then you have work environment and training group. Is there a reason why you left out training only group?
The railroad strikes. That whole group, I did have it. It got laid off right in the middle of the study. Thank you for asking that question. I did have 4 conditions. So that's when reality strikes, yeah. There was a reorganization. So fortunately, it was that whole group. But yes, I wanted to have a training only group. Sorry for that. Yes, please.
So there's obviously a spectrum between minimally trained and trained to the extent that you did. From a practical standpoint, how do you determine what a sufficient level of training is?
And I get that question a lot. Training is not a one-shot deal. And this training was, I would say, only an hour and a half. So the commitment of management to have employees come to the training on their own time was very important. And the training has to continue throughout. To have sustainable results, you need to have that culture to keep reminding them of what those healthy work patterns are. So I would say that if you're going to want to get the effects that I have, I don't think you can make it any shorter period of time, because I streamlined as much as possible in that workshop to design to go through what I would call the basic ergonomic issues, as well as impart the culture. I would actually have one of the senior managers come in and introduce the course to show that commitment. I just really believe that if you do not do that, you're just not going to see that impact of the training and the workstation only on performance, on that reduction in MSDs and visual discomfort.
Just to follow up on that comment, I'm always a little bit concerned about we as researchers being drivers of change or of sustainability, as opposed to it being homegrown within an organization itself. So who actually gave the training itself? Was it you as researchers, or did you train someone within the organization itself to perform those training duties?
Excellent question, thank you. I designed the training, I did not deliver the training. I worked with human resources, and we identified either it was an ergonomist, at one place it was the facility manager who gave the training. So I think that's a very important point, is that as a designer and as an evaluator, it's good for you to step out of that loop and not be the implementer and the delivery.